Hi, everyone. They told me just to go. There's no introduction, so I'll introduce myself. How's everybody doing? Yeah, good enough? Cool. So I always love it when people give me topics to talk about, and I know this was not too far off from things I've talked about in the past because it makes me think about things in a different way. And I initially, when Morton asked me to talk about how to sell C-level management on tests. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to talk. So I've got an outline here, so sorry, there's no slides. So I'm just going to talk. And if you have questions or something says you don't like, either keep it to yourself preferably, or just go ahead and ask me while I'm talking. So it's going to be more conversational. So when I initially saw the word sell testing to C-level management, I might like, because one of my big things is don't sell testing to C-level management, but this is a perfect opportunity to pick up this point. So I just found out as well, having a drink and a sandwich, that where is he? Somebody has not read my blog. Where'd he go? There, yes. And I said, so you don't follow me on Twitter? No. You haven't read my blog? I was completely offended. So let me give you a little bit of background about me. So like my considerably older colleague Paul, who spoke before, I've been in the business around 20 years as well, working primarily in what I refer to as enterprise technology. So this is, if you don't know my definition for enterprise tech is businesses that build technology, but their business is not technology. So Danske Bank would be a perfect example. Their business is not technology, although they use and build a lot of their own technology in order to make money, right? So insurance companies, you can start to make arguments around whether or not you can even do banking without technology these days, but their business is not selling their technology, even though it might be an aspect of that. So it's usually, on my unscientific counts, it's probably somewhere around 70 to 80% of the tech and tech jobs that exist in the world are in enterprise tech. So a lot of your big outsourcing companies that support banks and insurance companies, medical, pharmaceutical, that's all what I include in enterprise tech. It's not the cool, sexy jobs like Google and Twitter, although Google's getting kind of big, but Twitter's, I don't even think they're over 10,000 people in the whole company. So that's relatively small. And when I worked at Barclays and ran their investment bank and wealth management testing teams, I had 1,700 testers just on my testing team, and we had 25,000 people just in tech for the investment bank and wealth management businesses. So, and that was two businesses in a larger enterprise. So that's what I've done, managing outsourcing engagements, kind of running test process improvement in enterprise tech. My selling experience, so I've worked as a consultant for a while previous to my kind of banking experience. Ran a consultancy for a couple years, and now I work for a company called Techmark Global Solutions, where I head up their software quality management practice, which is basically, my role is to do a lot of management consultancy. So it's around test process improvement, helping get more value out of the operations around testing, and do some recruitment for senior folks as well. So it's really, that's my selling experience. So these days, I do a lot of actually, as opposed to kind of inside sales, which would be a test manager or test director would be in a company. I'm actually doing more outside sales where I'm trying to get them to work with us. So I'm keep my teeth sharp in terms of selling. The other thing I will tell you about me, the last thing I'll mention is that when it comes to pretty much anything to do with our business, and that business is software testing for a long time, I'm extremely cynical about it. So anything that gets told me is like, oh, this is going to work wonders. Or we were just chatting about Nassim Taleb's work he did a couple years ago on a book called Anti-Fragile, and how that was going to revolutionize. No, this is an extremely unenlightened business. No one has ever gone broke underestimating how consultants can take advantage of how unenlightened our business is. So what you're going to hear from me is extremely cynical viewpoint on what change you can actually get done on that. So with that, is everyone excited now to hear what I have to say? It's going to be a very positive talk. So why would you want to sell testing to a CXO, CSO, CIO? Why would anybody want to sell testing to one of those folks? Yes?
need to make a living, so we need to be selling stuff?
Well, I guess let's put selling in some context. What would you sell about testing to a C-level person?
Like why do the testing?
Why you're doing something. I mean, the typical reasons I find folks are they want more money, right, for their team. So I'm going to go and sell some aspect of what I want to bring in a new tool. I need more resources. You know, that's why you would go and try and convince somebody in the C-suite or a management or director level person why a tester would even have the premise to go talk to somebody about testing, right? Because usually my first piece of advice when talking to testers, and I get asked a lot about this because I've reported into a couple of CIOs, is why would you even want to talk to a CIO about testing? My advice is don't, right? Because one, some reasons on that is like, you know, one, they have no idea what testing is, right? And what they do know is usually pretty awful, right? So their view on, do not underestimate how bad, you know, Paul gave us some good examples just in automation, but don't underestimate how rudimentary C-level folks or management have of their view of what software testing is. Most people, right, that I've encountered, lots of them, still believe that testing is just a kind of quantitative, coverage-based, why didn't we just run through all the scenarios in every way? That thinking is pervasive in our business. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, the level of intellectual curiosity by most people at that level into what's happening in testing is just barely bouncing the needle on the bottom, right? They don't have much interest in that. And two, most of the information that they get about testing is awful, right? So if you just went out and Googled software testing, right, you could probably do it now. It's going to be just like some of the most horrific stuff, like 100% coverage. It's going to be dominated by the tool vendors or consultancies, right? It's going to be stuff like 100% coverage, automate all your testing. We can reduce your testing time by 50%. 100% of your tests can be automated, right? So just even a random look into that, that's not even, God forbid, a consultancy actually gets a salesperson in front of them. You know, and this is really recent stuff. I just ran across a company that is actually pitching themselves, this might even be their name, as the test factory. So have you heard of these folks? So they literally will tell you, give us your source code. We will wrap your entire, we have a test factory. We will wrap your entire application in tests, automate all of it, and then give it back to you, and you can we'll run them on demand for you, right? Now, I would challenge those people to spend 5 minutes actually testing a real application, and you know that's not, anybody who's struggled with ambiguity or complexity in testing a very, very big system knows that's just not possible, right? But that's the nonstop onslaught in these folks' ears. So my advice to people is if you want to take all that on, go talk to a CIO about testing, right? If you actually want to get somewhere with them, I'll give you my advice on how to actually get more money and resources and better things for your testing team, but it's not about talking about testing, right? And so the other part about, I used to have this model for why the testing industry is so bad for information, and it was a 3-part model, which is for CIOs, you know, they suck talking about it. For testers, you know, we suck talking about it. And for you personally, you suck talking about it as well, right? So just put a little blame on all of us there. And the reason is we don't talk in terms that people who manage technology as a business think, right? That is the primary driver for why if you're sitting there as a tester going, oh, I'm not getting anywhere, I always get my resources cut, my budget gets cut, that's the primary driver is you are not communicating to the people that make those decisions in a way that they understand the value that you're adding to the organization, right? Everybody with me? Yeah? Okay, right. So, all right, so that's the background on this. I'm trying not to go too far off points. Right. So what not to do, right? So here's my advice on if you're trying to go pitch somebody on testing, the first thing is not to do that, right? Don't approach it from a sales perspective, from I'm going to go pitch somebody on something that nobody wants to be sold. And if you want to compete with like those very shallow value propositions, that's the way to do that. So don't look at it, of course. Can anyone see who this is? Martin Hinier, right in the middle of my talk. So anyway, sorry, Martin. Right, so don't pitch it. And the other thing you don't absolutely want to do, right, is try to explain testing to them, right? You could, if you're a good tester, just if you know somebody who's a good tester, ask them to explain testing to you, and it's going to be something like, I'll hack James Bach's definition of this, where it's, exercising a system through complexity to understand, not like, I'm like 3 words into that, I'm already like, oh my God, stop. You know what I mean? Like testers are, because we like ambiguity and we're okay with that, and a lot of times people try and sound like they're smart, they overcomplicate what testing is. So if you're going to go in and try and explain what software testing is to somebody who you're this sliver of their entire budget, and you want to try to explain to them what you do, that's a losing proposition. I would highly suggest not doing that. Because one, again, people typically don't like things getting explained to them, and they're never going to do anything with that that's actionable, right? There's nothing that you're going to be able to explain to them about testing that they're going to be able to do something about, which is what you want them to be able to do. The other big mistake I see people make when they're trying to talk to senior management about testing is they talk about it in terms only testers understand, right? You're just going to glaze over, right? We can't even agree, right? So someone tell me how many test steps are in the ISTQB definition of a test case. I'm completely making this shit up, right? Nobody knows because it's impossible to define. Is it one test case with 100 test steps in it? Is it 4 test steps to everyone? No, we can't even agree what we call. There was some huge Twitter argument the other day about what integration testing actually meant. Right? We can't even agree amongst ourselves. So using testing terminology that's not widely accepted within the community, you're trying to explain to somebody who literally has a passing interest in this, right? From a practical execution level, a tactical level, you're going to have a very hard time, retaining their attention to be able to get your point across to them. So don't use testing terminology. Is everyone familiar with the idea of interactional expertise? Raise your hand if you're hardcore CDT people. No one here knows what, well, raise your hand, Paul. So Paul has heard of interactional expertise. Okay, there's a great, does anyone know who Harry Collins is? Thanks for helping me out, Duncan. You know what interactional expertise is. Right, so Harry Collins, everyone talks about, what's the book? What's one? Tacit and explicit knowledge. That's the whole testing versus checking and all that stuff. Like bumps all over this when we hit my chest. There's a book he wrote called Rethinking Expertise, which you should absolutely read. It's not a big book, which is great for me, but there's a lot in there that one of the key concepts is this idea called interactional expertise. And what it is, and I'll probably hack through the definition, but it's being able to speak the language of an expertise without being a practitioner in it, right? So that is, you can go talk, the idea is that expertise is on a continuum, right? Where on one end you've got kind of beer mat knowledge, and I always use this reference, I've had to stop using it recently because nobody knows what the hell Cheers is. Have you guys seen that American sitcom from like the 80s, Cheers? So Norm, the guy at the bar, the mailman at the bar, everyone knows a Norm. He knows a little bit about everything, right? So that's kind of beer mat knowledge, right? You guys at the bar, there's always some guy who knows, a little bit about everything. All the way to the other end, where you're actually contributing to the science, right? You are literally a scientist contributing to the body of knowledge, right? And along that continuum, the way I use it in my practical life is this, it floats along that for interactional expertise. So I can go, if I need to, talk to a sales trader at an investment bank about what they're doing and be able to help them rethink what they're doing in language they understand and use that then can help me do my job better to support them. I'm not a sales trader in practice. I don't have a Series 7. I'm not going to go sit on the floor, right, and actually execute as a broker. But I can speak that language, and I can also, so I can dip in and out of different expertise using the language they understand, and I'll do the interpretation to what I need to do to support them later. Does that make sense? So that's why I don't talk to the business that I support as a tester in testing language, right? I want to use language they understand, right? That's a big, particularly as a test manager, and particularly if there's this new trend I'm seeing now is more test coaches, test managers kind of being test coaches. We kind of support multiple teams. That skill, interactional expertise, is even more important in that environment. And the last mistake I see people making when they go and talk to management about testing is they don't understand how testing directly impacts risk to the business. If I've banged on and on about anything in my career, is not being able to articulate what you do in regards to its impact to the business. So I've used this example before where at Barclays we used to do what I'd call the critical defect test, right? So I would just randomly point at someone and say, you, yes, I'm actually pointing at you, stand up, tell us, I want you to tell me the last critical, so if our CEO came in today, you stand up and tell me what was the last critical bug you found while testing and what its potential impact would have been to the business had it got out into production. Go ahead. No, you don't have to do that. But you get my point though, right? If you're not thinking like that, if you're not going, wait a minute, how was this, if you're not linking those two directly, because trust me, that's how they're thinking about it. You can sit there and talk about integration testing and bitch about, I don't have enough environments and blah till you're blue in the face. None of that is registering. You said, hey, if that last bug I found would have taken down half of the US and we would have been out of market for 3 days, and that's when their math starts spinning, right? Because ultimately, who does a CXO, forget what letters, who they report to? The CFO, right? Right, so particularly in publicly traded enterprises, the person who, like we used to say at Barclays after the 08 crash, right, if you could go to jail for it, right, that was something you cared about. So anything that touches reg reporting, finance, any of what they're just putting in jail the next, they convicted them, right? The first developer for was it Volkswagen? Yeah, didn't they just convict him in the States? So it's gone a couple layers into the organization now. So that's what's real important. The odds are, right, and this is another thing when people talk to management about getting things for testing, and I see this a lot around tools, or they want to bring in a consultancy, or they want to do a different process, right? And this was a big thing in a while around automated testing, around being able to do the ROI calcs on ROI, where they would say, oh, well, there's 2,000 tests. It takes us X amount of time to run them. When we automate this, it's going to take us now Y amount. So we're getting all that back, right? I've separated lots of management from their money to support my test teams. I've never done an ROI calculation like that. Mostly because they're bullshit, right? And secondly, because I do not want to put myself on the hook for proving that later, right? Odds are you are not going to be able to support your business case for whatever spend you have in terms of ROI. I'll repeat that, right? Statistically speaking, right, odds are you are not going to be able to show that what you spent your money on, you got any benefit from it at all, right? Because primarily behind that, the science behind that is, as the good, Dr. Feynman says, you can only be sure that you're wrong, right? You can never be sure that you're right, all right? So be very careful about going in and making claims that you can't verify yourself, right? So that's what I tell people absolutely what not to do when you want to go sell testing to a CIO. right? So here's and I just went through and I just said, think about if I was going to go talk to your manager and I wanted them to invest in, we need some more people or we need a tool. What was my thought? How does my thought process go? So I'm just going to go through my thought process and how I approach these meetings. This is exactly, I just actually peeled a project off of an offshoring company. They're an Indian-based offshoring company. We won the business off of the existing vendor in New Jersey, and I pitched directly to their VP of technology and their CIO. And I was just like, okay, what did I do for that meeting, right? So this is how I prepare for going to talk to a CIO, right? So the first thing is and this is going to sound bad, but this is my language. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, right? So the first thing you do is profile your mark, right? You all know what a mark is? Yeah, so profile your mark. And I used to do this at every company I've worked at as well, some more successfully than others, but this is understand who the hell you're talking to, right? Their background, their education, where they hang out. If you can find that stuff out, there's lots of publicly available information from people on LinkedIn, on Google, on everything. Find out who the hell you're talking to, right? It is never underestimate how emotional people make decisions, right? If you come in and you're wearing Michigan blue and they went to some other school and they hate them, there's a lot of psychology around it. So as best you can, understand what their background are. Understand what their objectives are, right? What are they trying to get done? Everybody reports to somebody, right? And goal alignment is a huge thing, right? When trying to get people to do what you want them to do, right? So that they understand, right? What I'm going to ask you to do helps you meet your objectives. So you need to understand what those are, right? That includes their projects they've got running and what their priorities are, right? You would not go talk to the CISO of Equifax right now about something that wasn't directly related to security infrastructure or hacks, right? You just wouldn't, what would be the point of that? That's that poor woman's primary objective right now is dealing with that. So understand what their objectives are. And as well, I would say if you're a test manager, right, and if you're coming to the conference tomorrow, I'll talk more about my view on test management. But if you're a test manager, you are in the position of advocating for a bunch of people who work for you, right? It's your responsibility, and I use that word very specifically, to advocate for them in a way that they know you understand your boss's boss's bosses. So that's what really advocating for people in a career perspective is understanding that so that when you go to them, you have a greater success of that. So I would always make sure my management teams understand who we're going to talk to, and that's part of your responsibility. All right? So when you do go to talk to them, right, and you're bullet pointed, and I keep it to 3 to 5 things, right, focus on things that they care about. Risk to their specific business, right? That's just, if you want to hit something right down the middle of the fairway, help them understand how whatever you're wanting them to do, what you want from them, helps them manage risk, right? And as well, not project risk, because I think a lot of people talk about risk-based testing, but they're really talking about project risk-based testing, not business risk testing, right? They're really talking about their testing project or the actual IT project, not the risk to the business. It's more about, I see most people use risk-based testing as a way to help manage project risk, not business risk. So make sure that what you're focused on is focused on business risk. And make information, right? Because what's the mission of testing? Thank you. Information, right? The reason why we test is to learn something, whether it be about the application, how it's working, how it's not working, how we thought it was going to work, how it's actually working, how it's not supposed to work, right? How we're working as a team, right? Because there's, as you've heard a million times, a test can pass and there can still be a problem, right? So make information about what you're testing, what it's going to help them learn about their business, the primary thing that you're going to couch all your terminology in, and all your context is based around business risk information, right? And I would say, as well, be able to articulate 2 main points. and I bang on and on and on and on about this. Your request in respect to risk management, right? And if you work in a bank, regulatory risk, right? A huge issue right now all across the world, right? And even so more in Asia, they're starting to all link up together and regulators are working together. So regulatory risk is a huge thing, right? The amount of rework, right? If we don't do this, how much is it going to cost us extra? Because that relates to delays, right? That stuff people who don't work in tech care about. Why? And it's been since year naught. Technology. That's why Agile and RAD and RUP and everything else is. We're trying to get better at articulating when shit's gonna be ready, right? We're typically very bad at it, and even now, and I'm not that close to it, but I see this hashtag on Twitter about no estimates, right? So that just feels like to me like if I was a manager and I saw someone coming to me like if they were gonna put this idea out of we're just not doing estimates anymore, that's just like throwing in the towel, right? It's like, we're so bad at this, we're not gonna spend any effort anymore trying to figure out when we're gonna be done. And the other key point that I say you should absolutely focus on and be able to draw a straight line from your request to is two points, operational impact, and two aspects to that. One being time to revenue realization, right? So people think in technology a lot of times that it's just like, oh, it's just money that got given to us and it's not, none of it's real, right? And I know particularly in banks, the time I spent there, that business cases, that you spend all this time at the beginning coming up with a business case, and then budget gets released, and then it spend, and then it dips, and then we got to try and spend the rest in the third quarter before they try and claw it all back because everybody was wrong or something's happened and we need to rebalance. Being able to show how that we never go back and draw a line between what we thought we were going to do and what we actually are able to do, right? So the business is typically very bad at that as well. But again, if you want to be more successful in getting your requests approved, being able to show one of those two things. One, decreasing the time to revenue realization, or two, and I'll talk a little bit about this at the conference as well, is headcount, right? So in my experience in working in technology, the only currency that operational management or C-level folks trade in, right, is headcount. Because you can, any of those folks who told you they automated 15,000 test cases, but I've never fired a person because we automated their job away, right? And the only thing that when it comes time to year after year, third quarter, people are looking at their budgets. The only real operational cost because if you look at fixed costs, right, above the line costs, like in terms of infrastructure and machines and seats and fully loaded costs, that's a fraction. The thing that costs money in technology is people, right? So if you're not able to show, don't make a commitment to a cost reduction if you can't translate it directly to headcount, right? Otherwise, you're just going to look a fool, right? And just like every other technology manager, they just know it's going to cost more than what you're thinking are. So if I'm going to go ask for something, I couch it in those, or put it in those two contexts, right? Either I'm helping us realize revenue quicker by getting a project done quicker, or I'm able to decrease headcount, preferably through vendors, right, before we hit perms, right? But those two things, and that's just my, do you have a question, or are you just stretching? Okay. All right, so the key point on that one is if you can't do either of those two things, right, showing accelerated revenue realization or decreased headcount, you will probably be ignored. That's my experience, right? So, in summary, all right, okay, hang on, so let me get a summary and you can ask questions. I'm sure some people are like, what the hell is he talking about? All right, so in summary, right, one, anticipate pushback and headwinds, right? People aren't going to want to do what you want them to do. Preparing for meetings and those discussions, even if they're just a 3-minute conversation you have passing in the hall. I used to do this training exercise with folks, so I'd talk about my monthly one-to-one I had at Barclays with the CIO, right? And we had a 30-minute meeting, and probably 3 minutes of it, when I started reducing all the things that got taken up in that meeting, it was probably about 3 minutes of actual meaningful conversation about something I would want them to do. So that's an incredibly small slice of time. And besides that, he's got all the noise of everybody else in their life, doing things, or she might possibly have, 10,000 people all trying to get that same 3 minutes. So you have to be extremely pointed about your asks. So preparing for those meetings is absolutely everything. Two main point is goal alignment. Make sure when you're asking them something, they can understand coming out of that meeting how doing what you want is going to make them get what they want quicker, more efficiently, or with less money. And three, I say this at the end of most of my talks, is manage your expectations, right? It's extremely difficult with all those things I described to get people to do what you want in testing. It's usually ignored, but I think if you do some of the stuff I've talked about, in my experience, you'll be more successful in getting things out of the C-level suite. So that's my talk.